From beautiful East Tennessee in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, you are listening to the Sherry Voluntary Show, and I sure do appreciate you spending your time with me today. Today we're going to have a returning guest and someone that I have come to admire greatly after getting to know him a little bit and seeing his activism, and that he actually is unafraid. He seems unafraid. And that is Mr. Brian Ellison, who is also a candidate for Michigan State House. Is that correct? Or
it's U.S. Congress.
U.S. Congress. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So, and that campaign is going well, I take it?
It's going okay. It is what it is. It's a federal campaign, and this deck is stacked against us, but we're getting some media exposure and we're getting some attention, and so I think we're doing well.
Right. Well, speaking of attention, you got a lot of attention recently, and you're pretty good at getting attention, and I think for a very just cause. And so that would be the attention you got was an arrest by your local police department, whom you have been in conflict with for some time now. And I saw the video where you spoke with the city council, I think it was. I was floored, just amazed. I was so proud of you at that moment because, you said things that needed to be said. And speaking truth to power is not an easy thing to do. And you did it with such eloquence. So I really applaud you for that. And I also saw the video where was it the sheriff that followed you out afterwards?
That's the chief.
Okay.
Chief
So
of police, yeah.
the chief of police followed you down into the stairwell. You confronted him about following you and trying to intimidate you. And he wouldn't even, he wasn't going to say, I'm sorry to the woman whose husband was murdered by the police. So why don't you kind of set up, give us the story of all that's been going on, the history of why you are in conflict with the police and what happened most recently with your arrest.
Okay. Well, my conflict with police really dates back kind of a few years with just police in general, and it goes back to when I was arrested at one point for driving without my license in my pocket. So, long story short, I was pulled over. The police were searching my car, and I questioned why they were searching my car, and so because I questioned them, they're like, "Well, we can arrest you," and so they arrested me. For not having my license in my pocket. It's a misdemeanor in the state of Michigan. So, I was really kind of bothered by that, and just the way that the officers handled it and the way they did their job, and they violated my rights by doing the search. And so I was like, it really bothered me. So I was kind of between careers at that point. So I was like, you know what? I don't know what I want to do with my life, but maybe I can become a police officer, and maybe I can do this differently. And I went to the academy. I tested really well. I graduated top of my class, won the leadership award. I applied to a bunch of academies, and of course, I failed the psychological exam because I'm a Fruit Loop, right? I'm nuts.
You don't obey authority well.
Those tests are really, that's what they are. They're personality tests more than their psychological exams. And frankly, I just wasn't a good fit, so nobody could hire me. Well, this department, Royal Oak, was one of the departments that I applied for, and really the chief didn't have a choice, but he couldn't hire me. It would have been irresponsible for him to hire me at that point. So, there was never any kind of bad blood there or anything. It was just kind of the police thing in general, where I'm tired of them abusing their power. It's too easy to do the job right, to be nice, to be professional, and they really struggle with that. So. Goes back, I had a couple little kind of minor run-ins with them, just kind of calling them out for some stupid things, very, very minimal. And then recently, so in April 10th, there was a shooting. The police shot and killed a man by the name of Antonino Gordon. He was in a White Castle drive-thru. He was unarmed, and he had reportedly run from the police. They said he fled a traffic stop 15 minutes prior. Then decided to stop at White Castle on his way home in the same neighborhood where he was pulled over and reportedly fled. And the witnesses say that the officer pulled up to him while he was in the drive-thru, got out of his car, immediately drew his weapon, and shot 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
There has been no information released. There's been obviously there's there would be audio, there'd be dispatch audio. There's video at the White Castle. There's video from a camera across the street, but nothing has been released. And so this whole thing just stinks of a cover up. And if there was information that exonerated him, we would see that already.
Right.
So that kind of was playing out in the background. And really, I wasn't very active about it at all. It felt like an anomaly. It felt like just, okay, this happens every once in a while. And looking back on it, I'm really kind of disappointed in the fact that I just kind of was like, oh, really? No big deal. It's terrible. But 35 days later, the same police department shot another unarmed guy, a 20-year-old kid. He was on some drugs. He had just assaulted his parents, and they shot him in the street. He approached the officers unarmed, and the officer shot him again 4 or 5 times. We don't know the details. The difference in that case is that the police chief immediately released dash cam footage showing this kid approaching the officers because they felt like that somehow made them look good and made the shooting look justified because he was aggressive, unarmed but aggressive, and so they released that. And so when I saw that, and I listened to the police chief's press conference after that second shooting, just a ton of alarm bells went off in my head. Like, this is just so inconsistent. And clearly, you can't say in one case, we can't release any information because it's under investigation.
Right.
And in the next case, you release information because you feel like it makes you look good. And so, that kind of piqued my interest. And so I started looking into statistics and numbers, and that's when I spoke at the first commission meeting, and I told them, like, look, this was, you guys are like 220 times the national average for shooting unarmed men in your community. This is a problem that you guys should be looking at. And they're really very dismissive of it. Like, and talking to people offline, they're like, we need to wait for the investigation, make sure that, we'll find out if something happened wrong, inappropriate, we'll take care of it. And my biggest point the whole time was we can't wait for the investigation to end, because while you're waiting for the first investigation to end, another person was shot and killed. There's like a systemic problem within this department that needs to be addressed. So in the meantime, I had kind of connected with Nita Gordon, who is the widow of Nino, who was shot and killed. I connected with her on Facebook, and we met you see in the video when we met. You said you saw that video where the chief approached me. That's the first time that I had seen her in person. I had talked to her before that, but so then it just became a lot more personal. I mean, here is this young woman who recently married, who she's 27 years old, I think 27, 28, and she's been with Nino since she was in middle school. I mean, this is the love of her life, and he's taken away, and nobody's giving her any answers. Nobody's showing any compassion. It's heartbreaking. And so I just wanted to kind of bring attention to that. And so we did that on Memorial Day. We showed up at the Memorial Day parade, which was like the week after I spoke at the commission meeting. And I got a lot of flack from the community for doing that. That was the day for veterans, and it was an insult to veterans' families and all this other crap. And Memorial Day, we justified it was a day that was for remembering people who had fallen in conflict, right? It was originally a holiday to celebrate the Civil War dead. And so that's how we presented it. Was we're celebrating the life, we're memorializing the life of people who have died in what is the latest domestic conflict, which is this war of aggression that the police have taken on us. And so so that kind of ratcheted up tensions quite a bit.
I think that what you're saying is a really good point, just to stop you for a second. That Memorial Day originally wasn't about the romanticizing of war, which is what we have now, and the romanticizing of people who will obey the orders of a political elite, that they have no personal interest in going and fighting people. It was to say, this is terrible, and look at how many dead people there are, and we should remember this so it doesn't happen anymore. But it's really, really been co-opted and turned into something very vulgar, which is the absolute romanticization of the military and other order followers, and no criticism can be given of the military anymore. Otherwise, you're just completely marginalized. And so I just wanted to point that out, that I think that's a really brilliant point, that like with the original intent of Memorial Day, the intent of memorializing these men who have been murdered by the police is that we're saying there's a problem and something needs to be done and it shouldn't happen anymore. And this is why we should bring these men up and women so that people can see it and it's pointed out, and that it stops the problem. We want to stop that problem from being a systemic and everyday thing. We hear about it so often now that people aren't even shocked by it anymore.
Right. And it's even worse, like you'll see over this past weekend, I think maybe it was in Pittsburgh, there was a kind of a big protest for a young black man who had been killed by police.
Yes.
And, it really it's really disturbing to me that this community that I'm in they're like, well, no, the victims were the bad guys. Like, they must have done something wrong, because if you run from the police, you're automatically guilty, and somehow that means you deserve to be shot by police. And that's how people in this community, how they look at it.
If you just obey, really you won't get hurt.
Right, because God forbid we disrupt their suburban utopia, right? To think that, well, this can't happen to my family, this can't happen to my kids, this can't happen to my brother. It's because my family's good guys. This doesn't happen to good guys.
Good people don't disobey the authorities. Good people don't stop and say, why are you searching me? You have no right to search me. They just say, well, I guess I have nothing to hide, so I should hide nothing. Like these stupid phrases that people use to shame people into not standing up for their rights. It's deplorable, and I'm so sick of that mentality.
Yeah, and at one of our protests, I had this guy that went up to the family members and said, "You disgust me." He says this to the family members of the victims of Nino Gordon, and so I approached him and I said, "Did you just say that they disgust? I mean, they didn't ask to be part of this."
Yes.
And he said, "Well, what was he doing? He was doing something wrong." I said, So he does. Even if he was, so he deserved to be killed? Is that what you're saying?" Mm-hmm. He's like, "You got a problem with that?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, I do." And he goes, "Well, we teach our kids that if you run from the police, they have a right to shoot you." And I said,
"Oh my God.
You're teaching your children that if they run from the police have a right to shoot them?" I'm like, this speaks volumes about what's wrong with the mentality in this country. That's what you're teaching your kids, because that's false. That's not true at all. But that's the mentality that we're up against. And I think it's certainly in like a suburban community where, upper middle class kind of, it can't happen here. Well, it's happened twice, and these people are still in denial.
Yeah.
You think back and, when I was in high school, did I ever, or when I was 20, I was in the military, but, was I ever drunk and maybe inebriated and maybe would have potentially done something really stupid like Cody Reynolds did? Maybe, right? That could have been me. That could have been one of my family members. Have I ever had, and the biggest thing on Nino Gordon was he had traffic violations. Well, I have a ton of traffic violations. Like I in recent years, in my old age now, I've been cooling it down a little bit, but I used to have a lot of tickets. And does that mean that if I get pulled over by the police that I deserve to get shot because I have a bad driving record? Right. Or I had somebody who had a DUI in the past, all of a sudden, okay, well, must have deserved to be shot because he had a DUI.
I think it's a problem. We maximize our own virtues and we minimize our own vices, so that when this happens, something, and they say, well, he should have obeyed. Like I would have just obeyed. Would you? Like maybe you wouldn't. You don't know until you have that unjust run in with the authorities what you might do. So I think you have to make that decision beforehand. Are you gonna go along, or is it worth it to stand up for your rights? And sadly, I think a lot of people in this country have decided decided that their rights mean very little when it comes up to what the police want to do. And the police have definitely decided that your rights mean nothing when they want to do something. And we have every example of that in almost every one of these shootings. It's an example of those things. So I just really find that deplorable that you would teach your children, not you, but that he would teach his children that, to run from the police is the wrong thing and that you deserve to die for that. Like, maybe it is the wrong thing. I'm not even going to argue that with you, but is it worthy of death? Like, absolutely not. There's no proportionality with them. And I hear that so much from people, especially on the right, where I would love to, recently with the border issue and the immigrants, someone said to me, I would love to go to the border and pick off these illegals trying to come into our country. And I said, so stepping on your yard is worthy of death? Like, bring it down to your own level. Would that be okay if they trespassed? If it is trespassing, I'm not going to legitimize that. We're not arguing that. But if they trespass on your yard, you're saying that that's worthy of death. Like, that's a whole different thing than trying to break in your house. So there's just like thought goes out the window. Compassion goes out the window, even with people who call themselves libertarians in a lot of cases. And it's sickening.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And to even make it even more complex in this case with Nino, it's, we don't even know for sure that Nino was the person who fled the traffic stop, right? So there's nothing been released, like no radio dispatch, like with his license plate or anything, and we don't know even how the police officer pulled up or if he could have identified the plate. And he was driving somebody else's car, so even if they ran the plate, they wouldn't know who was driving it because he was driving somebody else's car. But
he didn't give the opportunity to prove either way, and
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I really put myself through this mental exercise the other day. I was sitting at a drive-through, and I'm literally sitting there, and because I have a pistol, I carry a pistol with me, and I'm like, what would I do right now if a police officer just pulled up right next to me and drew his gun on me?
Right.
Like, what would my instinct be? Because my pistol's right here on my seat. Knowing how the police have behaved already, that they just apparently opened fire. Would my instinct be to grab my weapon? Would my instinct be to put my hands up? Would my instinct be to drive away? I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But for people to think that, well, all he had to do was just do this, do that. You have no idea how you're going to react if you're caught completely out of the blue and somebody comes up and is sticking a gun in your face.
Yeah, it's a very traumatic experience for people who are trained to have that. It's when it's actually an unknown on the other end of the gun. It's a very different experience than even the training. So I think it's naive to think that you know exactly what you would do. It's just it's a way of being able to put the rest of the world in a box and say, well, this is what I think is right, and I don't have to consider any facts or any actual realities of emotional makeup of human beings. And as you were saying to the body camera or the footage that they released in one case and not in another, my producer and I Daniel were just talking about this yesterday, that often, even when they do release body cam footage, they have to be forced to, but they will cut out sections that don't look good on them. And this is the whole point of having the body cameras, was to show that there are issues going on, and they should be wanting to release those things in order to, catch the bad apples that, those just a few bad cops give everyone a bad reputation, right? So they should definitely want to release camera footage when that happens. And two, if they've done nothing wrong, then why are they hiding something? Turn it around on them. Like, it's such a ridiculous thing because they have a monopoly on the flow of the information as well. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, that's it. They do have, and that's where we've tried. So what I wanted to do was kind of try and turn the tables on them, and I wanted to control the release of some of the information. And so we had, the week after Memorial Day, the police department had a charity event scheduled.
Oh, this was beautiful. I saw the video.
Run with the police. And so I was like, this couldn't be any more perfect. This is an event for the police. It's their community outreach event. People's tensions are already high because of the Memorial Day thing. Like, this is the event to protest. And so so we set up an event and we call it Only Guilty People Run, because we all know that only guilty people run. So all the cops are running. We know for a fact that that's so we
I love
had
it.
we had there was leading up to it. At one point we were like, well, maybe we can get this event just shut down, maybe if we make enough noise. And then somebody from what do we call them besides bootlickers, right? Some cop apologist came on and said, oh, we should counter protest. I'm going to show up. And I said, counter protest, the more the merrier. We'll
Right.
love to see you there. And he's like, oh, you don't want us there because, we open carry and we support cops. And I was like, no, you don't get it. I would love to see you there. Like, please come out.
Right.
And we thought that maybe that would get people nervous enough, but obviously people talk a lot more than they actually act. And so
Right.
there was no counter protest that showed up. But
And
on
there
that
doesn't
day,
need to be. That's the popular opinion.
right. So we had about 15 or 20 people show up, and we didn't really have much of a plan as far as what we were going to do to protest. We had our signs, and I was like, I was going to run with the chief, and while he was running, I was going to just kind of heckle him, right? Like, hey, stop running. Why are you running? Show me your ID.
Right.
Just whatever, because he was doing a fun run with the kids, and I don't think he deserves that. I don't think he deserves that moment of community outreach where he's the good guy when he's responsible for the terrible department that has now killed 2 people. And
Yes.
so yeah, I wanted to take that away from him. And I think I made the mistake of saying that ahead of time in a forum, and so they kind of saw it coming. So I was wearing a body cam. I have a GoPro that I was wearing the whole time I was there, and I did release a second video, like, I don't know, a week and a half ago, maybe,
Yeah.
showing some of that stuff. But I approached each one of the officers that was there and asked them, how do you feel about having a body camera? And I was cordial. I was polite. I know one of the guys personally. I don't know the other ones personally, but they all knew me. They all,
Yeah,
I
of
was
course.
faces,
I bet they have a picture of you in the precinct, like in
I'm
their
sure.
building.
Yeah. Public enemy number 1.
Yeah.
So, but I just asked him, how do you feel? And the first officer that I spoke with, he gave a great answer. He said, whatever the chief says, but then he said, I think they are a good idea. We're just working through some of the problems. And he conceded the fact that, that good cops or that bad cops make it almost impossible for good cops to do their job. Like we had a, kind of a dialogue. And then the next one I talked to said, I'm not going to play into your games. I'm not, very dismissive. And
Right.
I walked away, went to the next one, and the guy I know from high school, and he said, we can't talk, like, like they've been briefed. Of course they have too, and I've heard that from
Right.
others that, like, you can't side with anybody who's against the chief, or you're ostracized and you're set up to get in trouble or written up or held back for promotion, whatever they hold over these guys' heads. So then I approached the chief and I talked to him, and I asked him, and he walked away from me. He took like 2 steps away, and I said, hey, how do you feel about body cams? And he turned around, he's like, keep moving, and he pushed me. He tried to push me out of the way. I was like, whoa,
Right.
I'm just asking you a question. Then the other officers came over, they pushed me back on the sidewalks. I'm like, I don't understand. I can't ask a question. You guys just get to push people around for asking questions. But his instinct when I didn't do what he wanted me to do was to get physical, right? So he wants to push me. He could have just walked away. But no, instead it's, he wants to push me like he owns the space. He's obviously superior to me. So, anyway, it was right after that he was doing his run, and I went out into the street and started warming up, started stretching out, and one of the officers came up and said, you can't run. And I said, I can. And he said, no, you can't be in the street. And I said, oh, okay.
In the public street.
Right, it's public street. We'll see how it goes. So I walked away and was stretching out, and then I moved like further away from the starting line. I was just going further down the road, and they started approaching me. And like in the second video I released, you can see there's like 3 of them. They're like all coming at me, and so I was like, back up, just stay back from me, leave me alone. stop approaching me, and he just went past me. And of course, while he's going past me, he's like, well, like you said, it's a public street. And I'm like, yeah, I guess you just admitted it's a public street. I can be in it too, right? No big deal. So so they, he went past me, and I was getting surrounded, so I went to cross the street. As I'm crossing the street, he follows me across the street, and I'm like, dude, stop approaching me, leave me alone. I'm unarmed. I'm And so at that point, I'm in the middle of the street, and I have different officers kind of on all sides of me. And so I'm like, well, I just pull out the bullhorn. I had no intention of delaying the race, and I didn't delay the race. So I just got on the bullhorn, and I said, stop approaching me. I'm unarmed. Leave me alone. I'm just trying to cross the street. And they're like, get out of the street. And as I'm backing up, like I'm saying this, as I'm backing up to get onto the grass, I step onto the grass, and that's when they grab me, and they're like, you're under arrest. I'm like, and I was like kind of shocked. Like, I was expecting them to try and stop me, but you're going to wait. I haven't even done anything yet. Can I please do something disruptive if you want in order to get arrested? Can I do something that justifies this? But no, they arrested me right there. And I really wasn't expecting it. I was expecting me, I wanted to push it. I wanted to push it as far as I could, but I didn't get an opportunity to push anything.
Right.
So they're trying to cuff me, and I tried to, not help them. I resisted a bit without being violent. I certainly didn't want to hit or attack them. I really just wanted to prove a point more than anything. And so yeah, they took me to the car, put me in the car, and that that was that as far as the arrest went.
Brian, what was the charge that they arrested you on?
They called it disturbing government operations because
Wow.
I was in the street during a private event.
Yeah.
Like if you hear all the contradictions from the police officers on scene, this is a private event. I said, no, it's a public street. No, it's closed. It's a private event. Well, if it's a private event, how am I interfering with government operations? Right. And if it's a public event, then I can be in the street. Let's make up our minds here.
And the thing is that all those people that stood around, and I saw the speech that you gave, the beautiful speech that you gave before, I think it must have been before the race, and they were booing you and things like that for pointing out some of the problems with the police department there, but you were very respectful. And all those people who were booing you and saying, these are our heroes, there's not a problem with the police. You're the problem, mister, for speaking up. When you're being attacked by the police for doing absolutely nothing wrong, nothing against the law, like that matters really, but you were doing nothing wrong, and therefore they sat back and let it happen because they don't like you personally, because you're a troublemaker. When really the trouble comes from the fact that they support a police department that does not want to be responsible for them. They want to hold them up as heroes and magnify their heroism, but then minimize and reject any criticism, any honest criticism of them. And so that's why people have to go to extremes. It has to get more and more extreme to point it out, because everyone is so dismissive of it, dismissive of actual problems. And I think many people in the Black community would say to us, yeah, like, now we've been experiencing this for years and years and years, and now now it's happening to white folks. So people are standing up more and more for it when they've been trying to tell us for a long time that it was happening. So I just think it's deplorable that people who would say that they are for, freedom and the American way, to then see a wrong like that happening, an injustice, from people who should be held to a higher standard than that. Like, if you're going to be in that position, you should be held to a higher standard than picking on someone who is saying so. Like, if you have a real integrity, then you can withstand criticism. You can say, okay, that may be a fair point, but they have no integrity. They've been taught they don't have to. So right. It's sickening. So you got out. Did you have to post bond? Are the charges still pending, or
the charges are still pending? So there was two charges. So the first one was the obstructing government operations, and the second one was obstructing or resisting arrest. So the way I don't know how it works in Tennessee, but in Michigan, the resisting arrest goes away completely if the other,
which it
you
should.
have the right to resist an unlawful arrest.
Right.
So that really shouldn't be an issue. And I had a pre-trial scheduled for Monday. What's it, like the 9th or the 10th maybe?
Okay.
But I think it's going to be postponed because my attorney has a conflict. And frankly, I'm not in a huge hurry to resolve it. It's not like, when I got arrested before, it really bothered me and it was weighing on me, and I just wanted it to go away because I was like, it was the first time I've been arrested, and like it was a really uncomfortable situation. And this time I don't feel any weight whatsoever. This is just, and I'm gonna push this thing as far as I have to push it. If it has to go to trial, then it has to go to trial. But this is about principle. It's not about settling a case. It's not about making it go away.
Right.
It's about the principle, the fact that they were completely in the wrong, and that they should be held accountable for the fact that they did that.
Yes.
So, we'll see. And if that means that I go to a trial and they convict me and I have to spend 180 days in jail because of it, well, shit happens.
Right.
That's again, it's more to me, the principle behind it is much more important than getting it resolved.
And that, I believe, what you just said is the real, if you want to talk about American values, that's a real American value, that we stand for principle over convenience. And that's part of what has become a problem in this country, in my opinion, is that people aren't willing to say, I don't care what the majority says about me, and I don't care what they do to me. I'm right, and I know that, and I can sleep the sleep of the just knowing that I stood up for myself. What did you do? Like, everyone loves that picture of Nazi Germany where the whole crowd is giving the Bellamy salute to the Fuhrer, and there's one guy not doing it, and it says be that guy, but there are so few people who are actually that guy, and I think you're that guy, Brian, and I appreciate that. And I just, it's time that we say, I'm willing to be marginalized by people who are idiots, honestly, and say that if you just obey, then you wouldn't end up in that situation. If me getting arrested for what's right, for standing up for principle, makes me a loser in their eyes, well, I'm willing to be that because I'm a loser to them already just for thinking the way I think. So it's time for us to stop with the respectability nonsense and to get out there and actually put our asses on the line a little bit and stand up and be disliked. Yes, maybe be disliked, which is not an easy thing for me. I'm a very social person. I get that I want to be liked by people. I think everybody really does. But what's more important, leaving a legacy to our children of freedom or leaving one of obedience to an illegitimate authority? I think that's where we have to, maybe it's because of our ages. I think we're close in age, and we're at that point in our lives where we're just fed up with that kind of mentality of trying to make people like us, and we're ready to leave something better for our kids. And so I really admire that about you, that you're willing to take it to where you have. And I'm thankful that you're safe at this point. I always, get concerned, like, wow, I wonder what they're going to try and pull, because you just don't know. And I know you have a family, and so they've been known to play sort of terrible games with people's lives because your life doesn't really mean anything to them.
Right.
When it comes to respecting the authority, you've challenged the authority, and that's a very dangerous place to be at times. So I'm sure, and I know you understand that better than anyone.
Yeah, and that obviously that's the difficult part, is that I do have a family. I have 2 teenage sons, and they drive through that community every day. Mm-hmm. And that's part of what drives me, is like, what they could be next. Like, yeah. This is not some again, I could be the guy that buries my head in the sand and say, well, that could never happen to my kids because I raised my kids right. And but
they won't run from the police because I told them that they will be worthy of death if they do. Right.
And so it's personal to me, and I could just cross my fingers like everybody else. Mm-hmm. And frankly, like I did for many years, I had my head down for a long time and just kind of living the suburban life, and had a job and paying the bills and doing fun stuff and hoping that everything turns out all right, knowing in the back of my mind that, everything's that the government is shit, and that, we're all in trouble. It's just a matter of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was just, fairly recently, within the last couple of years, that I decided that wasn't good enough, and that wasn't how I wanted to live my life. And so, I want to leave my kids something better. And if that means, putting myself on the line to do that, then that's what I want to do.
Yeah. People often hearken back to the founders of this country. Generally, not all, but some of the biggest order followers, bootlickers I know, talk about the founding fathers an awful lot and don't understand who they were at all. Because the people who actually founded this country were radicals, and were misfits, and were cop killers, and were, all these things that they disdain, but they stood up against that authority that we would, many of them today would say, that's the wrong thing to do. They're just doing their jobs, where the redcoats were just doing their jobs when they were doing house-to-house searches too. So there's this like total remaking of the past to suit the image that we want now, when really that's not who they were at all. We had the revolution, then we had a counter-revolution, and that counter-revolution was the Constitution of the United States, and people don't want to look at that and see how that really centralized power, legitimized their authority over us, and then since then it's been that downward decline into the authority is right, and it's growing, and that's the nature of centralized government. That's what it is. That's what a state is. So I'm always amazed by that, when they don't realize what they're saying. You're proving my point when you hearken back to the founders, because you know what, they were pretty out there, pretty radical, and not everybody was on their side, but they did it, and it afforded us a level of freedom. We're still reaping the benefits of that today, but it's quickly going to the side. And the people who say they love freedom the most are often the people that are making that slide happen. So it takes going to these extremes at times. I don't wish it on anyone, but we all have to stand up in our communities and do something. It's easy to get on Facebook, and it's easy to do different things, but to actually stand out from the crowd and say, I do not consent to this, and I do not agree with it, that is making yourself a target. And most people don't really want to be that target. So I think as libertarians, especially, if we want to actually get something done, we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to say, no, we are different, and we don't want to do things the same way. And, screw your respectability. This is what is right. It doesn't matter if you respect it or not. That's the right thing. So I know that you believe that, because I have absolutely done it. And I wish you the best in your case. I hope they drop it against you and they get reprimanded somehow. But that's part of the problem with the monopoly on law and force, is that they're all agents of the state. When you walk in the courtroom, they're all against you. They're all cops, basically, because they all work for the state, and they're all paid by them, and that's, they're state agents. So there's really no representation of the individual in a situation like that. So where do you see everything going from here? After, say the case is settled, or whatever happens, what's your next step in the process?
Well, I'm still pushing forward against the department. I got this guy right here. He's got to go.
Yeah, stand up and show the shirt. It's pretty amazing. So
this is the chief of police, and I've talked to officers off the record in the past. Recently, I've talked to former officers, and they get that he's a problem. And but unfortunately, the city, the leadership within the city doesn't get it, and so he's got to go.
Yeah.
And so we're pushing that. We're pushing the issue of body cameras, which as a libertarian, I don't know that that's I don't feel like that's a great solution. But I think it's a good Band-Aid. I think that it helps with some transparency, which obviously is an issue with this department. And so I think that they need to implement that. And then they really just need to look at some overall training and general reform and how they how they interact with the public. So I've done a bunch of FOIA requests. I'm waiting for information. I'm looking for training records, department training policies, that's where I want to focus, because I really think that that's probably what's happening in this case, is that these officers aren't getting continual training. There's no standard within the state of Michigan that requires that for officers. And so it's up to the individual department. And so I think that's probably where they're failing. And so I did submit some FOIA requests, and they gave me my notice that it was going to be postponed. So they're using the delay tactics. But hopefully I want to use the, any of the money that I raised from my Royal Oak Police gift shop. I'm going to use that to keep up the fight. And I am going to, we're going to expose everything that we can expose. And hopefully we can see some big turnover at the top of the department. And, there's some good guys in that department. I can easily make the case that all cops are bad, because I believe what they do is bad, inherently, their profession. But there's some good people in that department that could do the job much better if they didn't have their hands tied by the people who are just completely reckless. So
I think, one of the things that we've often talked about is that people aren't really our enemy. The state is our enemy, the ideals that are upheld by the state. And until someone is actually aggressing on me, they're not my enemy. And I want to reach out to them as much as possible to bring them to my way of thinking, or at least to bring them to the fact that I'm a person and I'm a good person, and I may disagree with them, and there are legitimate reasons for that. And I would say, as my best friend is a police officer, my best friend of 27 years. And is he a good person? Absolutely. Is he a good cop? No, because he has not yet once brought to light some of the abuses that he knows about, just like everyone else that is a police officer. So that's how I can say, are all cops bad? Well, are they bad people? No, but are they bad cops? Yes, because one, if they do bring out something to light, then they're not cops for long. They're pushed out of the force. They have all kind of tactics that they use within the police force to keep that thin blue line protecting them, because it's not about protecting the public. Nope. And they're trained. I think you're absolutely right that the training is a warrior mentality. They're trained to be warriors and not to be public servants. They're not trained with this idea of we're here to help our communities. They're trained in the idea is that we're here to police them, and we're here to make sure that the law is being followed, not that the right thing is done. And so that's why, my family, we love the Andy Griffith Show, right? That's something that when I was growing up, we used to watch the Andy Griffith Show, and that would have been a real police officer, someone who in a community being a group of people who know the names of their bums. Like they're actually a community, not just a bunch of people who live near each other. But that, he would go in and put himself in the jail, that Otis, and then come out and Sheriff Taylor would kind of laugh it off. That's the sort of thing that you would want in a community, is that he's not really hurting anybody. He's technically against the law, but he's sleeping it off. There's no real consequence to that, because there's no deserved consequence. He didn't hurt anyone. So I think, people still have this idea that we have the police are Andy Griffith, when really they're the Punisher, and they advertise it that way. They put it on their police cars. They have tattoos of it. Daniel just saw the other day a police officer here had a Punisher tattoo on his arm. And if that's what you are, if you're a vigilante, then you're not a cop. That's not what they were intended to be. So, well, I don't know, maybe. But, do we really want that kind of mentality out of people who are supposed to be held to a high standard and are supposed to be about what's right and wrong, and they're not. They're about the law and what the law says is right and wrong, and then they can just excuse their own behavior. Their own morality goes out the window because they've been told it's okay, and that's not okay for the rest of us. So we can't possibly lend them that right because we don't have it. So I just get off on my little tangents here.
I read an interesting article a couple of years ago. Somebody had posted it online somewhere about the difference between a law enforcement officer and a peace officer.
Yes.
And that the intent is to have peace officers that are there to keep the peace, that are there to, protect the public and and instead it's converted totally to this law enforcement mentality, and which now really just translates to kind of policing for profit,
Right.
and getting as much revenue as they can. And I think that that's kind of, if that police function could translate or transfer back to more of the peace officer and protecting the public and keeping people safe and making decisions based on that concept versus the law enforcement concept, I think that would go a long way.
Yeah.
Is that possible? Yeah, probably not.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a huge battle to fight. And it's not even about fighting the police mentality on it. You're fighting the people who support that mentality. That's what gives them the ability to do what they do, because they know the majority of people aren't going to call them on it, and they're going to get all the benefits of being the hero of their community from most people, and none of the consequences. They're going to have other people to fight those battles for them. So it's really a protected class, and it's protected by the people who are just haven't come into contact with them in the wrong way yet. And I know personally from that, when I was 12 years old, my stepfather was wrongfully arrested for on charges of murder. He didn't know that till hours after he sat in jail either. But they tried to make some evidence fit himself and his brother, and they didn't read him his rights. They were at our house when we got him. They didn't read him his rights. They didn't tell us what was going on, what he was being arrested for, nothing. And yet, was there any recourse we could have taken? No. And at that point in my life as a child, I didn't understand it, and it wasn't until years later that it really hit me what could have happened to my family. And I think that people don't think about it that way. They think, well, the police just made a mistake. But there were facts in this particular scenario which would have clearly shown that it was not a mistake, that they needed to finger somebody for it, and he kind of sort of fit, and so they were gonna make it happen. And I can look back on that and go, this has been a big problem for a long time, and I think everyone knows of situations like that, and more public situations like that, and yet they don't want to take it. If this is in the public light now, or I know about this, how many more times does it happen that I don't see it and that it's not publicized? Not nobody, but very few people, the normies as I would call them, want to actually take a look at that, because it digs at the heart of the foundation of what they believe, and that's a very difficult thing to do. But like I said, I admire that you're trying to do that, and you have to live in that community. So everything that you're doing is not like it's consequence free. It's not like being an online warrior or something where you can just say something behind a keyboard and it doesn't matter. Like, this is your real life, and it's really being affected by these things. So, and I appreciate your stand for people who maybe couldn't stand up for themselves. Like, you didn't have to do that, but you did because you're a principled person, and so I appreciate that very much. I admire it, and I thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.
I really, the more we can talk about things like this, hopefully the more, if one more person listens to what we're talking about, then would have listened yesterday, then we've made progress, right?
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much, Brian. And I know you are a busy man, and I will let you get back to your life and everything that you've got going on. And just know that there are people here in Tennessee who support you and who love what you're doing and what you're about. And we're there with you. Give out the link to your store and to your campaign and all your .coms and everything.
So my campaign page is Ellison, 4 Congress.com. So that's for my race for U.S. House in the 8th District in Michigan. And then my gift shop. So like I have a campaign merchandise, but my Royal Oak Police gift shop is you can find it on the Royal Oak Police Facebook page. So Royal Oak Police has a Facebook page, and they don't have a whole lot of followers yet, but they got some interesting content.
Yeah.
And there is a link on that page to the Teespring store, which is, it's just on, if you're familiar with Teespring, if you go to Teespring, you can search Royal Oak Police Gift Shop. It'll pop up, and you can find all the great merchandise. I just put up something today for kind of a memorial shirt for Nino Gordon. It says "Never forget, he was one of us."
Yeah.
And I think that's really kind of one thing that I want to make sure doesn't get lost in the message, is that these, Nino Gordon and Cody Reynolds were both people, residents of this community. And it's a shame that so many people are dismissing what happened to them. So
yeah. And if
we
you
want to try and keep that in the news.
Yeah, we don't want to forget that to the police, it is about us and them, and we're not one of them. Like George Carlin said, it's a small club and you ain't in it. And that is the God's honest truth. They do not see us civilians as part of them. And so, as we all know, the us and them, it's so much easier to do things to the them than it is to the us. So we need to get other officers willing to stand up and criticize some of these things and to actually do something about it. Because, like you said, many of the people there know that the chief is shit. But are they standing up and doing anything about it? No, because their livelihoods are on the line. And it doesn't matter if some, poor kid gets shot in the street for nothing. Basically nothing that would deserve death. And to not have a fair trial. They're becoming the judge, jury, and executioner of people because he ran away from a traffic stop. It's insane. And that same thing happened here in White County. So, we just have to start saying that we're not going to look at the victim of the shooting and say that, well, he did something wrong. That's for a judge to determine, a jury to determine, and they should have their day in court, and they should not be shot down in the street like dogs. They didn't deserve that. So
right.
I think it's great that you're reminding people that there are real people behind these situations. So once again, I thank you, Brian, and I wish you all the best.
All right, thanks. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.